do justice to explaining exactly who Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is. He spent a lot of time in these other books that he wrote on the 4 divisions of life and the Varnashram Dharma system and the different castes and different orders of spiritual life. And although he did speak about Krishna, it was buried in this massive amount of other information about Varnashram Dharma and the duties of the different social orders and spiritual orders and so forth. But he's not absolutely sure. So when his guru arrives, Narada Muni, who's a direct disciple of Brahma, and Vyasadeva is the disciple of Narada, that's where this chapter begins. Now Narada arrives during the despondency of Vyasadeva, and now the great sages, or the sages in Naimisharanya, are going to hear from Sutta Goswami what transpires between Narada and his disciple Vyasa. Sutta Goswami said, text number 1, chapter 5, "Thus the sage amongst the gods, Narada, comfortably seated and apparently smiling, addressed the rishi amongst the brahmanas," or he addressed his disciple Vyasadeva, and he says, and then Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada explains, Narada was smiling because he well knew the great sage Vyasa, or Veda Vyasa, and the cause of his disappointment. As he will explain gradually, Vyasadeva's disappointment was due to insufficiency in presenting the science of devotional service. Narada knew the defect, and it was confirmed by the position of Vyasa. Text 2. Addressing Vyasadeva, the son of Parasara, Narada inquired, "Are you satisfied by identifying with the body or the mind as objects of self-realization?" So this is a pointed question. In other words, when he says, "Are you satisfied by identifying with the body or mind as objects of self-realization?" he's already implying that Vyasadeva did not speak enough about the soul and spent too much time talking about the body and the mind, which are not the real objects of self-realization. Self-realization means understanding the difference between the body and the soul. The body, the mind, the intelligence, these are all, the body is made up of 5 gross senses: earth, water, fire, air, ether, and the mind. And then the 5 senses and the mind, so 6 senses. And then the intelligence. So the mind, intelligence, and the false ego comprise a subtle body, and the earth, water, fire, air, ether comprises the gross body. So, therefore, what Narada is implying in text 2 is that he spent too much time talking about the body and the mind, and didn't really focus on the real subject of self-realization, that is knowledge of the soul and its relation and our relationship with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in the purport, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada writes, "This was a hint by Narada to Vyasadeva regarding the cause of his despondency. Vyasadeva, as a descendant of Parasara, a great powerful sage, had the privilege of having a great parentage which should not have given Vyasadeva cause for despondency. Being a great son of a great father, he should not have identified the self with the body or the mind. Ordinary men with a poor fund of knowledge, can identify the body as self or the mind as self, but Vyasadeva should not have done so. One cannot be cheerful by nature unless one is factually situated in self-realization, which is transcendental to the material body and mind. So here's a fundamental dilemma that every one of us is faced with. Who am I exactly? If I identify with the body, the gross body, made of earth, water, fire, air, ether, 5 gross elements, or I identify with the subtle body, mind, intelligence, and false ego, I make a mistake. I'm neither of these two things. These are simply a gross covering and a subtle covering of the soul. This is why there's so many problems, social problems and political problems and wars and things like that, because people are identifying with the gross and subtle body and not with the soul. So if I don't know who I am, then almost everything I do will be wrong in this lifetime. And therefore I'll give more importance to decorating the body and entertaining the mind and ignoring the soul. So the spiritual life begins when we identify ourselves as the soul that's the source of consciousness within the body and is the actual person. Now, how do we know that? Well, when a person dies, something leaves the body. And the first thing that we notice is the lack of consciousness. And there's no more movement in the body. There's no more interaction with other persons. The person falls silent. And we get rid of the body. We bury it or we burn it, etc. Because something is missing. What is it that's missing? It's the soul that was the source of consciousness. So body minus soul means no person is there. Body plus soul means a person is there. So therefore, Krishna begins to instruct Arjuna in the 2nd chapter, 11th verse, Asochan anvasocastvam pragnavatam chavasase gatasuma cha nanasochanti panditaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, while speaking learned words, Arjuna, you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead. So, here we see Vyasadeva is despondent, and Arjuna was despondent also, because they both had the same fundamental problem. They were more concerned with the body. In the case of Vyasadeva, he was explaining so many things in quasi-spiritual literatures pertaining to the body and the mind. And Arjuna, he was lamenting because he was certain that if he engaged in the battle of Kurukshetra, many members of his family would die, because they were on both sides of the battlefield. So we have two people here now, Vyasadeva and Arjuna, that are despondent. And the reason for their despondency is their misidentification. They're both identifying with the body. Now, Vyasadeva knows the difference in the body and the soul, but he gave more importance to the body in everything he wrote up until the end of the Vedanta Sutra, the body and the mind. And Arjuna is lamenting because if the battle goes forward, people on both sides of his family are going to be killed. So when Arjuna surrenders to Krishna, then Krishna begins to instruct him, and Srila Prabhupada writes, the Lord at once took the position of the teacher and chastised the student, calling him indirectly a fool. The Lord said, you are talking like a learned man, but you do not know that one who is learned, one who knows what is body and what is soul, see, that's the whole point, one who knows what is body and what is soul, does not lament for any stage of the body, neither in the living nor in the dead condition. As explained in later chapters, it will be clear that knowledge means to know matter and spirit and the controller of both. So there's three things that we have to learn that are elementary knowledge in spiritual life. There's the body, there's the soul, and there's the controller of both of those things, and that's God, or Krishna, the super soul. So whenever we see a person, we see a body, we see the person's individual soul, and we see the individual soul accompanied by God, or Krishna, as the super soul. Then we're actually seeing in reality a person. But most people only see the body. And the body that's decorated is a superficial thing that people are attracted to. So we see that if you look in the movies or in magazines or on the internet, you'll see women are dressed in such a way as to accentuate their body. Now in Islam, they have what's called a burqa, which completely hides the form of the body of a woman, right? But in society today, in Western society, the shape of the form of the body of the woman is, and men, is accentuated, so that you just naturally identify the person with the body. Right? However, we have to adjust our seeing through the prism of Vedic knowledge. And here Krishna says that if you look at someone, you should see three things. You see the body, which has two parts to it, a gross body and a subtle body. And then you see the individual soul of that person, and you should also see the presence of God as super soul. Then you're actually seeing. And the body is a temporary thing, and the individual soul of that person is an eternal thing, and God, or Krishna, is also eternal. So actually, the real value is seeing the presence of the soul and its relationship to God, because the body is a perishable thing. So as explained in later chapters, it will be clear that knowledge means to know matter and spirit and the controller of both. Arjuna argued that religious principles should be given more importance than politics or sociology, but he did not know that knowledge of matter, soul, and the supreme is even more important than religious formularies. Now, why does he say that? Because if we practice religion simply to follow ritual performances, we might never understand the actual, let's say, purpose of religion. The purpose of religion is to clear all doubts about what is real and what is false. What is real is the soul. What is false is whatever is temporary. So something temporary exists for only a certain period of time. Something real exists eternally, and it cannot be destroyed. So that is the soul. But if we ignore the soul, then we only see a very small part of reality. And because of that, we make many mistakes in life, because we're not addressing the real issue of human life. The real issue of human life is to understand our relationship with God and be able to transcend in this life the preoccupation with body and sense gratification, and then reorient our use of the senses for pleasing God or pleasing Krishna, who has senses also. So when we lack this knowledge, then we just follow religious formularies without really understanding the purpose of religion. And because Arjuna was lacking in that knowledge, he should not have posed himself as a very learned man. As he did not happen to be a very learned man, he was consequently lamenting for something which was unworthy of lamentation. The body is born and is destined to be vanquished today or tomorrow. Therefore, the body is not as important as the soul. One who knows this is actually learned, and for him, there's no cause for lamentation, regardless of the condition of the material body. So this is the beginning of spiritual knowledge. Most people never even get started in spiritual knowledge. They might follow certain religious formularies, but they have no genuine knowledge. And because of the lack of this knowledge, there's such things as prejudice, racism, hatred, and all kinds of abnormal behaviors, people killing other people and so forth, because they have no knowledge of what the actual purpose of human life is. So now, then Krishna instructs Arjuna, there was never a time, Natvevaham Chaturnasam Nam Natvam Nemit Janadipahad Nachayvina Bhivishyama Sarvavayama Takparam. Never was there a time, Arjuna, when I did not exist, nor you, nor all others, all the living beings, nor will there ever be a time we shall cease to exist. So Krishna establishes that the soul exists before entering the body, while in the body, and after leaving the body. So he establishes the full eternality of the soul. And in Western religions, it's not clear that the soul has full eternality. Like in Christianity, the soul is put into a body at birth. Well, that's why the body and the soul are considered one in Christianity. And therefore, when a person dies, they have to bury the body so that at the second coming of Jesus, he can resurrect all the bodies from the graves and have a final judgment, etc. So this connection of body-soul, or let's say misinterpreting the soul and the body to be one, is faulty vision of the reality. And then, so here Krishna, first of all, establishes the full eternality of the soul. The soul is not something that comes into being, and therefore it cannot go, because it's eternal, it cannot go out of being. It's something that can't be killed, and that's going to be explained a little bit later on in this second chapter. So anyway, Vyasadeva gave more importance to the body and mind and not enough importance to the soul in everything that he wrote. So now text 3 says, your inquiries were full and your studies were also well fulfilled, and there is no doubt that you have prepared a great and wonderful book, the Mahabharata, which is full of all kinds of Vedic sequences elaborately explained. So the Mahabharata is full of stories, and many of those stories are very instructive, very interesting. And Prabhupada explains this verse. This is text 3. He says, the despondency of Vyasadeva was certainly not due to his lack of sufficient knowledge, because as a student he had fully inquired about the Vedic literatures, as a result of which the Mahabharata is compiled with full explanation of the Vedas. So the Mahabharata is a historical book of history that is entertaining to read. It has many interesting episodes, and at the same time, it teaches the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, but in an entertaining way. So some people can't stand just reading philosophy, but they like to hear stories. So, and these stories were not fictional; they were factual stories, and they're very instructive, and they're very educating. Okay, so what Narada is saying here is that, okay, Vyasa wrote so many things, and many of them were very interesting reads, and a lot of elaborate explanations about philosophy, about history, and so forth. But he gave so much, he gave what's called information overload, and without emphasizing the actual kernel of truth in all that information. So now, text number 4, you have fully delineated the subject of impersonal Brahman, as well as the knowledge derived therefrom. Why should you be despondent in spite of all this, thinking that you are undone, my dear Prabhu? So now he's being somewhat, let's say, critical here, when he says you have delineated the subject of impersonal Brahman. So there are 3 levels of understanding God. There is Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Brahman is the impersonal aspect of God, and it is represented as the effulgence emanating from the body of God. So when there's a blinding effulgence, you don't see the origin of it, but you do see something very spectacular. But you can't differentiate anything because of the blinding effulgence. So in the explanation of this verse, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada writes, the Vedanta Sutra, or Brahma Sutra, compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, is the full deliberation of the impersonal absolute feature of God, and it is accepted as the most exalted philosophical exposition in the world. It covers the subject of eternity, and the methods are scholarly. So there cannot be any doubt about the transcendental scholarship of Vyasadeva. So why should he lament? Well, explaining the first step in God realization, that is, the impersonal understanding of God, is not complete knowledge. It's only the aspect of eternity. But there are 3 aspects. There's eternity, knowledge, and bliss. Unless one understands all 3, they will be dissatisfied. The person will be dissatisfied. Because what is fully satisfying is transcendental bliss, transcendental happiness. When a person is genuinely happy, they feel satisfied, regardless of what is around them, whatever happens around them. If you simply have eternity, but not knowledge and bliss, you can get bored with it. So here, and this is instructive also, the Vedanta Sutra is primarily about attaining the eternity. It does not have full knowledge, and it does not have, let's say, complete bliss. Knowledge, there is some knowledge and there's some bliss, but it's not complete. So, a little knowledge, as they say in English, is a dangerous thing. Because if you don't have, like for example, you might know how to change the oil in your car, but that doesn't mean you understand the carburetor, and the other different parts of the car. You know one aspect of it. So if something else goes wrong, you won't be able to fix it. You'd have to get an expert to come. In the same way, if you only know one aspect of God, but there remains a lot more to know, then you will not attain full perfection, you'll not attain full knowledge, you'll not attain full happiness. And as long as our understanding is piecemeal, there's a tendency of falling down from spiritual life. So Vedanta Sutra is mostly concerned with Brahman realization. Srila Vyasadeva said, so now he's going to say something to his guru, Narada. All you have said about me is perfectly correct. Despite all this, I am not pacified. I therefore question you about the root cause of my dissatisfaction. For you are a man of unlimited knowledge, due to your being the offspring of one, meaning of Lord Brahma, who is self-born without mundane father and mother. So Brahma was the mental creation of Garbhodakshay Vishnu, which is an expansion of Krishna. And Garbhodakshay Vishnu, or Krishna, does not need his consort Lakshmi to produce children. He can do it on his own. He has all power. So here, Vyasadeva is rightfully glorifying his guru, Narada. He says, you are a man of unlimited knowledge due to your being the offspring of Brahma, who is self-born without mundane father and mother. So this is proper for the disciple to glorify his guru. And although what Narada has told Vyasadeva up till now is correct, but still Vyasadeva is not satisfied. And therefore he says, I want you to tell me the root cause of my dissatisfaction. So in the commentary, Srila Prabhupada writes, in the material world, everyone is engrossed with the idea of identifying the body or the mind with the self. As such, all knowledge disseminated in the material world is related either with the body or with the mind, and that is the root cause of all despondencies. This is not always detected, even though one may be the greatest erudite scholar in materialistic knowledge. It is good, therefore, to approach a personality like Narada to solve the root cause of all despondencies. Why Narada should be approached is explained below. So this means that, picking up from what Narada said right in the beginning, or in verse 1, or verse 2, that Vyasadeva was concerned more with the body and the mind. So, the scientists are concerned mainly with the body. And then the psychologists and the psychiatrists, they're concerned with the mind, right? And that's their limit of knowledge. They don't go to the soul. Or if they talk of a soul, it's something that's made of matter at an advanced stage, which is a wrong conception of the soul. So, all the knowledge in this world today is mainly related to either the body or the mind. And because of that, people are not satisfied. Because the body and the mind are temporary things. It's the soul that's the real person. So if you can't identify yourself as an eternal soul and in an eternal relationship with Krishna, then you're missing the real essence of life. And therefore, almost everything we do will be a mistake. So, most people can't understand this. That's why it says, this is not always detected, even though one may be the greatest erudite scholar in materialistic knowledge. There are many very brilliant scholars in the world today, but they're actually stupid because they miss the real identity of the person. They can't identify themselves, nor can they identify other people. They don't see or they don't accept the existence of an eternal soul as being the person. So, to understand something that seems to mystify most people, one has to, and is the root cause of all despondency. Now, that's why many people are frustrated today. We see it in politics, we see it in relationships, we see it in business, we see it everywhere. It's all pervasive. The despondency, frustration, anger, etc. So if we want to know the root cause of this despondency, we have to go to a bona fide spiritual master who doesn't only have material knowledge of gross matter or material knowledge of subtle matter, but also has knowledge of the soul and its eternal relationship with God. So then verse 6, Vyasadeva is still speaking to Narada, and he says, "My Lord, everything that is mysterious is known to you because you worship the creator and destroyer of the material world and the maintainer of the spiritual world, the original personality of Godhead, who is transcendental to the three modes of material nature." So this is important because there's not only a material world, there's also a spiritual world. And almost everyone ignores that knowledge. And there's very little information about the spiritual world. There's virtually no information in the Bible or the Quran. There's maybe a little bit more in the Quran than the Bible. And in the Torah, there's no information at all. The Buddhist writing, zero information about the spiritual world. Now, the material, yeah.
The Bible also, they have Old Testament is the Torah, right?
The Torah is, it's how many books of the Old Testament you count. The Jews count a certain number, the Christians count more number of books in the Old Testament, and then they have the New Testament. Well, the Jews don't count the New Testament, and they don't count all the books of the Old Testament that the Christians do.
So this knowledge which you said in the Bible is little more than what Torah has. I thought the origin is the same, Abrahamic religion.
Yeah, but it's progressive, right?
Okay.
So Christianity is just a little bit more knowledge about the spiritual world than the Torah, but that doesn't mean it's much, right? And the Quran has maybe just a little bit more because Muhammad went to heaven and heard God and saw Archangel Gabriel, but very little knowledge. It's not like the Srimad Bhagavatam. There was a tremendous amount of knowledge about the spiritual world, and the different sections of it, and so much knowledge about the liberated living entities there, and the relationships with God, and what's going on. And so you don't have that knowledge in the Bible or Quran or the Buddhist writings. Okay, so now he says, "My Lord, everything that is mysterious is known to you because you worship the creator and destroyer of the material world and the maintainer of the spiritual world, the original personality of Godhead, who is transcendental to the three modes of material nature." So there's a lot of information now in this verse. First of all, there's a spiritual world beyond the material world. And there's a person who knows everything, all the mysteries of the material world and the spiritual world. And this person is uniquely qualified because he is transcendental to the influence of the three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. So in the purport, or the commentary, Srila Prabhupada explains, a person who is 100% engaged in the service of the Lord is the emblem of all knowledge. Such a devotee of the Lord in full perfection of devotional service is also perfect by the qualification of the personality of Godhead. As such, the eightfold perfections of mystic power, Asta-Siddhi, constitute very little of his godly opulence. A devotee like Narada can act wonderfully by his spiritual perfection, which every individual is trying to attain. Srila Narada is a 100% perfect living being, although not equal to the personality of Godhead. So again, it's a huge amount of information in this short purport. First of all, the symbol, or let's say the qualification of a self-realized person is that they'll be 100% engaged in the service of the Lord. So, none of us can say that we're 100% engaged, but if you ever met Prabhupada, you would definitely say he's 100% engaged in the service of the Lord. 24 hours a day. Okay? So, and he was. And in this purport, Prabhupada said, this is the emblem of knowledge. In other words, if a person is studying the Bible or the Quran or the Vedic literature, and they are 100% engaged in the service of the Lord, that means they've understood it. And if a person is engaged just 10% in the service of the Lord, like you have 24 hours a day, if in the 24 hours one is engaged 2 hours, let's say 15 minutes, they're only 10% engaged in the service of the Lord. But if they're engaged 100%, 24 hours every day, then that means they've got real knowledge. Just like if someone tells you, my dear friend, today is December, 19, right? You're going to die January 6th. 100% sure. So if you knew that, would that change anything? Would you go to work tomorrow, let's say, or would you go to a movie? Would you watch television? Would you, what would you do? Would that change your life? Yeah, definitely. So what would happen? You would probably try to keep yourself 100% engaged in Krishna consciousness, right? Knowing well that January 7th, I'm dead meat. My body's going to be dead. And now, most people don't know. Like Maharaj Parikshit knew he was going to die in 7 days. So what did he do? He sat down and listened to Srimad Bhagavatam, asked many questions, and got many answers, and he was so enthralled he didn't eat, he didn't sleep for 7 days, and then he died. So we have to think about this. Prabhupada says the emblem of knowledge is that a person is 100% engaged in the service of the Lord. Such a devotee of the Lord is in full perfection of devotional service. So in other words, he's equating perfection of life with full engagement in devotional service. There's an equation there, right? Is also perfect by the qualification of the personality of Godhead. What does that mean? Well, also perfect by the qualification of the personality of Godhead. So the personality of Godhead has said, Sarvadharman Prityaja Mamekam Saranam Braja Ham Tvam Sarvapapipyo Mokshisyami Mahasucha. It tells Arjuna, you surrender completely unto me, and only unto me. And if you do this, I'll free you from all your previous karma. Therefore, you should not hesitate, you should not doubt, you should not fear. Right? So, that is the quintessential verse Bhagavad Gita, this is what we actually should do in life. Is surrender completely to Krishna. And if we do, this is said, it says that here, a devotee engaged in the service of the Lord, 100%, is also perfect by the qualification of the personality of Godhead. So, what's the qualification of the personality of Godhead? He says, always think of me, always worship me, become my devotee, and always offer your homage unto me. Everything you do, everything you give in charity, and everything you eat, and everything you perform as austerity, it should all be done for me. That means 10%, right? So that's the qualification that Krishna is looking for. If we do this, then not only we have the what he called here the emblem of qualification of being always engaged in Krishna consciousness, but also this is what Krishna wants the devotee to do. This is what he considers perfect. Right. As such, the eightfold perfections of mystic power, Asta-siddhi, constitute very little of his godly opulence. In other words, the 8 mystical powers that one may develop by performing Ashtanga yoga, he's saying here basically that's nothing compared to the power of a devotee. And the proof of that is Ambarish Maharaj, who defeated Durvasa Muni, who had 8 mystic powers. Say, Anima, Lagima, Mahima, and Prapti, Prakamya, so forth. These are different mystic powers. They were nothing compared to Ambarish Maharaj. And also Vishwamrita Muni, he saw that the power of Vasistha Muni was much greater than all the power he had. Therefore, he wanted to become a Brahmana like Vasistha Muni. Right? It took him over 60,000 years to attain that position, right? That qualification. So mystical powers, which are amazing powers, it's nothing compared to the power of the devotee, or the qualification or opulence of the devotee. So a devotee like Narada can act wonderfully by his spiritual perfection, which every individual is trying to attain. Srila Narada is a 100% perfect living being, although not equal to the personality of Godhead. So Narada, in his previous life, was the son of a single-parent mother. And she was very poor. And he never had any formal education, other than associating 4 months with saintly persons, Bhakti Vedantas. But those 4 months of association were enough to catapult him to a position of perfection, by which he dedicated the rest of his life to Krishna consciousness. And then in his next life he attained the position of Narada, who is, as it says here, wonderful by his spiritual perfection. He doesn't need an airplane to fly through the air because he's sinless. Therefore he's very light. And he has all knowledge. And also he's a wonderful personality. So, and plus he's the guru of Vyasadeva, the great, who's a literary incarnation of Krishna. So we see, you don't have to have a college degree to succeed in life. No one has succeeded as much as Narada Muni. Right? So his is real success. So that's that's another thing we have a problem with. People don't know what real success is. They count real success in material terms. And that is a very, very low-grade success, because whatever success you have, you're going to lose it. You can't take it with you. But we see that Narada Muni, he went from being an unliterate or an unlettered little boy to becoming the greatest saint in the history of the world, simply by association with pure devotees and having a submissive attitude and being asking questions, listening, and offering service and eating the remnants of their food. He became the greatest saint in the history of the world. So now verse 7, like the sun, your goodness can travel everywhere in the three worlds. Yes, Narada Muni does not need an airplane or a rocket ship or anything like that. He has the power to travel simply with his transcendental body anywhere he wants in the material and spiritual world. He's not only limited to the material world. And like the air, you can penetrate the internal region of everyone. As such, you are as good as the all-pervasive supersoul. Please, therefore, find out the deficiency in me, despite my being absorbed in transcendence under disciplinary regulations and vows. There's a lot to this verse. See, every verse goes deeper and deeper into understanding. So, Narada Muni is not only able to fly through space, go from the material world to the spiritual world, back and forth at his own will, but he can also penetrate the internal region of everyone. That means the mind and the intelligence and the false ego. He can actually see these things and penetrate into them. So Vyasadeva said, look, you go into my mind, go into me and tell me what I have done wrong, what I'm lacking. Even though I'm absorbed in transcendence under disciplinary regulations and vows. So Vyasadeva is the literary incarnation of Krishna, but yet he's subordinating himself to Narada. And Prabhupada explains, transcendental realization, pious activities, worshiping the deities, charity, mercifulness, nonviolence, and studying the scriptures under strict disciplinary regulations are always helpful. Notice he says, helpful. That means there has to be something else beside those things. Right? And strict disciplinary regulations, well, basically he's talking about sadhana bhakti, following the rules and regulations strictly of spiritual life. And one gets transcendental realizations, one engages in pious activities, one worships the deities, one is charitable, one is merciful, one is nonviolent, one studies the scriptures, etc. But there's still something more. So now Narada begins to speak. Again, after listening to Vyasadeva, his disciple. Shri Narada said, you have not actually broadcast the sublime and spotless glories of the personality of Godhead. That philosophy which does not satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord is considered worthless. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. So now he's getting to the gist of the question. What is the root cause of Vyasadeva's despondency? The eternal relation of an individual soul with the Supreme Soul, personality of Godhead, is constitutionally one of being the eternal servitor of the eternal Master. The Lord has expanded himself as living beings in order to accept loving service from them, and this alone can satisfy both the Lord and the living beings. Such a scholar as Vyasadeva, has completed many expansions of the Vedic literatures, ending with the Vedanta philosophy, but none of them have been written directly glorifying the personality of Godhead. Dry philosophical speculations, even on the transcendental subject of the Absolute, have very little attraction without directly dealing with the glorification of the Lord. The personality of Godhead is the last word in transcendental realization. The Absolute, realized as impersonal Brahman or localized supersoul Paramatma, is less productive of transcendental bliss than the supreme personal realization of his glories. The compiler of the Vedanta Darshana is Vyasadeva himself, yet he is troubled, although he is the author. So what sort of transcendental bliss can be derived by the readers and listeners of Vedanta, which is not explained directly by Vyasadeva, the author? Herein arises the necessity of explaining Vedanta Sutra in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam by the self-same author. So in other words, incomplete knowledge will not lead to real self-satisfaction and blissful existence. So Vyasadeva is given a plethora, a huge amount of knowledge, but he hasn't done something that is essential, and that is glorifying the transcendental qualities of the Lord. So, therefore, we see the Srimad Bhagavatam is full of narrations by devotees of the glorious qualities of the Lord. Like, for example, in chapter 8, there's Queen Kunti. And in that chapter, there are wonderful prayers glorifying the qualities of the Lord. And Kunti Devi says, "O Krishna, those who continuously hear, chant, and repeat your transcendental activities, or take pleasure in others doing so, certainly see your lotus feet, which alone can stop the repetition of birth and death." So she's glorifying the feet of Krishna. She's saying just seeing your feet will confer freedom, or will stop the repetition of birth and death. And then she also says, it says, thus, accepting the prayers of Srimati Kunti Devi, the Lord subsequently informed, let's see, one second. Kunti Devi says, "My Lord, I consider your Lordship to be eternal time, the supreme controller, without beginning and end, and all-pervasive one, the all-pervasive one. In distributing your mercy, you are equal to everyone. The dimensions between living beings are due to the dissensions between living beings are due to social intercourse." So she's glorifying the Lord, who is non-different than eternal time. "O Lord, no one can understand your transcendental pastimes, which appear to be human and so are misleading. You have no specific object of favor, nor do you have any object of envy. People only imagine that you are partial." So over and over again, she's glorifying the Lord. She says, "My Lord, your Lordship can easily be approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted. One who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and bodily beauty, cannot approach you with sincere feeling." So she says, "O Krishna, I offer my obeisances unto you because you are the original personality and are unaffected by the qualities of the material world. You are existing both within and without everything, yet you are invisible to all." So anyway, the Bhagavatam, this book, in 18 volumes, has the prayers of Kunti Devi, that glorifies Krishna. The prayers of Prahlad Maharaj that glorify Krishna. The prayers of Dhruva Maharaj that glorify Krishna. Prayers of Lord Shiva that glorify Krishna. The prayers of Lord Brahma that glorify Krishna. This is something that Vyasadeva did not clearly do in everything he wrote, from the compilation of original 4 Vedas, the Puranas, the Mahabharata, the Vedanta Sutra. He did not do it in a clear and direct fashion. And this was the cause of his despondency. Okay. So now, in the purport, Prabhupada says, the eternal relation of an individual soul with the Supreme Soul, Personality Godhead, is constitutionally one of being the eternal servitor of the eternal Master. The Lord has expanded himself as living beings in order to accept loving service from them. And this alone can satisfy both the Lord and the living beings. Such a scholar as Vyasadeva has completed many expansions of the Vedic literatures, ending with the Vedanta philosophy, but none of them have been written directly glorifying the personality of Godhead. Dry philosophical speculations, even on the transcendental subject of the Absolute, have very little attraction without directly dealing with the glorification of the Lord. The personality of Godhead is the last word in transcendental realization. The Absolute realized as impersonal Brahman or localized Supersoul Paramatma is less productive of transcendental bliss than the supreme personal realization of his glories. The compiler of the Vedanta Darshana or Vedanta Sutra is Vyasadeva himself. Yet he is troubled, although he is the author. So what sort of transcendental bliss can be derived by the readers and listeners of Vedanta, which is not explained directly by Vyasadeva, the author? So, if Vyasadeva himself is not satisfied, how can we be satisfied if we read the Vedanta Sutra, right? Herein lies the necessity of explaining Vedanta Sutra in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam by the self-same author. So the natural commentary of the Vedanta Sutra is this book, the Srimad Bhagavatam. And this book will lead one to be fully satisfied and be fully blissful and fully knowledgeable and fully engaged in the service of the Lord. So text 9. Although, and again Narada Muni is speaking to Vyasa, although, great sage, you have very broadly described the 4 principles beginning with religious performances, you have not described the glories of the Supreme Personality, Vasudeva. So, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, the prompt diagnosis of Sri Narada is at once declared. The root cause of the despondency of Vyasadeva was his deliberate, and notice he uses the word deliberate, that means he did it on purpose, for some reason or other, was his deliberate avoidance of glorifying the Lord in his various editions of the Puranas. He has certainly, as a matter of course, given descriptions of the glories of the Lord, Sri Krishna, but not as many as given to religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and salvation. In other words, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. These 4 items are by far inferior to engagement in the devotional service of the Lord. Sri Vyasadeva, as the authorized scholar, knew very well this difference. And still, instead of giving more importance to the better type of engagement, namely devotional service to the Lord, he had more or less improperly used his valuable time, and thus he was despondent. See, now this is an important question here. If we don't use our time properly, cultivating Krishna consciousness, and going to the gist or the core of Krishna consciousness, which is glorification of the Lord, after many years, we will also feel despondent. We will also feel not satisfied. We will also feel that there's something missing in our life, even though we've been engaged in Krishna consciousness for so many years. This is a very important point that we should think about. And still, instead of giving more importance to the better type of engagement, namely devotional service to the Lord, he had more or less improperly used his valuable time, and thus he was despondent. For this, it is clearly indicated that no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. Without being engaged in devotional service to the Lord, in the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is clearly mentioned. See, this is an enticing little quirk of Prabhupada. He throws that in. He says, in the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is clearly mentioned. Do you know where it's mentioned? It says clearly mentioned. From this, it is clearly indicated that no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in a devotional service to the Lord. So, okay, I'm going to take a quick stab at it. 4th chapter, 40th verse. Ajnascha shadadanascha samsayatma vinasyati nayam lokusti na paro na sukham samsayatmanaha. But ignorant and faithless persons who doubt the revealed scriptures do not attain God consciousness, they fall down. For the doubting soul, there is happiness neither in this world nor the next. Now that, I'm not claiming that's right, but I took a stab at it right away. See, Prabhupada is challenging us when he says, in the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is clearly mentioned. So where is it mentioned? So again, from this, it is clearly indicated that no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in a devotional service to the Lord. Nahabhikamanastasti pratijaya no vidyate. No, maybe that. In other words, he's saying, without devotional service, you'll never be happy. Right? So, yeah, we have to think about that. So let's see. He says, no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. Okay, in the 8th chapter, let's take a look there. 8th chapter, verse number... verse number 9, I think. He who meditates on me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path, he, O Partha, is sure to come to me. No, that's not it either.
Positive thing, Krishna.
Bodhiantas parasparam katyantas. When two devotees meet each other, they experience great pleasure and satisfaction conversing about the Lord. But it says, without being engaged in devotional service, no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. So, in other words, you're going to be happy by engaging in devotional service. So, well, it's happily performed, yes, but that's by cultivating the knowledge. This is, which is type of devotional service, but let's see if there's some, okay. Let's look at the 18th chapter. All right, anyway, we have some homework now. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma Naso chatina kanchati, samak sarve subhutesu mad bhaktim labhate param. One who is thus transcendently situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed toward every living being, every living entity. In that state he attains pure devotional service unto me. So this would be one verse. We might find another one. So here Prabhupada says, in the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is clearly mentioned. That is, without being engaged in devotional service, no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. So that comes close to it. There probably is another verse that's even closer. Okay, so that's our homework. Go through the whole Bhagavad Gita and find a verse that indicates no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in a devotional service of the Lord. Prabhupada does it. This is a tease. He does it all over the place. When you start reading carefully the books, he puts that tease in there. He said, this is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. And, all of a sudden you're at a loss. Where is it mentioned? After liberation, which is the last item in the line of performing religiosity, etc., one is engaged in pure devotional service. This is called the stage of self-realization, or Brahma-Bhuta stage. See? Brahma-Bhuta stage. There it is. Actually, okay, let's see. That was the hint. Okay, the 5th chapter, 7th verse. Let's see what it says. 5th chapter, 7th verse. Okay. It says, merely renouncing, the 5th chapter, 6th verse, merely renouncing all activities, yet not engaging in the devotional service of the Lord cannot make one happy. But a thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the Supreme without delay. That's close. That's close. Okay, I'm going to just go one more time, then we'll keep going.
The same thing you mentioned, the purport of 6.4.
6.4?
Yeah, the purport.
What's it?
The first few lines.
On the first line, we want the verse, but okay, let's take a look at 6.4. It says that in a verse, but I mean the purport, but not in a verse. Okay, yeah, 5th chapter is important. Okay, one second. It says here. One second. One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme and ultimately attains the Supreme. Okay, wait a minute. Jai Shri Radha Nilamadhava Ki Jai. Well, the Brahma-Bhuta is probably the one. Okay, anyway, we'll keep looking. Yeah. What? 11:54. Okay. 11:54. 11:54 is a very important verse. Bhaktya tvananyaya sakya hamevam vidurirjana gyatam jastum chatatvena pravestum cha parantapa. Is that it? Is that it? Can I be understood as I am standing before you and can thus be seen directly? Only in this way can you enter in the mysteries of... Yeah, but it doesn't say... It says, no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in a devotional service to the Lord. So, this is a wonderful verse, but it's not exactly... So the closest we've come is the Brahma Bhuta verse. It says, after attainment of this Brahma Bhuta stage, one is satisfied. But satisfaction is the beginning of transcendental bliss. One should progress by attaining neutrality and equality in a relative world. And passing this stage of equanimity, one is fixed in the transcendental loving service to the Lord. This is the instruction of the personality of Godhead in the Bhagavad Gita. Right? The conclusion is that in order to maintain the status quo of the Brahma Bhuta stage, as also to increase the degree of transcendental realization, Narada recommended to Vyasadeva that he, Vyasadeva, should now eagerly and repeatedly describe the path of devotional service. This would cure him from gross despondency. Okay, so what he's referring to here, that when he talks about neutrality and equality, we have to go to, that's why I said the 5th chapter. So in the 5th chapter, you have Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmani Gavi Hastani Suni Chaiva Swapakecha Pandita Samadarshina. So that is having the Samadarsha visions of equality. All living beings have an eternal relationship with God. That doesn't mean that if you're a dog, you're not on the same level as a human being. Well, on the bodily level, that's true. But on the spiritual level, it's not true. The dog also has a soul, just like we do. See? So it doesn't matter whether your body is white, black, brown, or yellow, or whatever. We all have a relationship with God. So that's what this is called, samadarshi, seeing with equal vision. Okay? Then, neutrality means that one is not disturbed by anything that happens in life. And that's explained in the 5th chapter, verse number 19 and 20. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and thus they are already situated in Brahman. And then the next verse says, a person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant, nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, who is unbewildered, and who knows the science of God, is already situated in transcendence. And it says in the purport, the symptoms of the self-realized person are given herein. The first symptom is that he is not illusioned by the false identification of the body with his true self. He knows perfectly well what he is not. He knows perfectly well that he is not this body, but is the fragmental portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is therefore not joyful in achieving something, nor does he lament in losing anything which is related to his body. This steadiness of mind is called stira buddhi, or self-intelligence. He is therefore never bewildered by mistaking the gross body for the soul, nor does he accept the body as permanent and disregard the existence of the soul. This knowledge elevates him to the station of knowing the complete science and absolute truth, namely Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. He thus knows his constitutional position perfectly well, without falsely trying to become one with the Supreme in all respects. This is called Brahman realization, or self-realization. Such steady consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. Okay, so equality and neutrality, right? That's explained in the 5th chapter, verses 18 to 20. Now, one has to go beyond that and to attain this transcendental happiness. Okay, so anyway, we're getting close, but going beyond that is being situated always on the Brahma Bhuta stage, transcendental to the modes of material nature. And, okay, so it says, the conclusion is that in order to maintain the status quo of the Brahma Bhuta stage, as also to increase the degree of transcendental realization, Narada recommended to Vyasa that he, Vyasadeva, should now eagerly and repeatedly describe the path of devotional service. This would cure him from gross despondency. And then verse 10, the last verse we're going to study today. Those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows. Since the all-perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Crows and swans are not birds of the same feather because of their different mental attitudes. The fruitive workers or passionate men are compared to the crows, whereas the all-perfect saintly persons are compared to the swans. The crows take pleasure in a place where garbage is thrown out, just as the passionate, fruitive workers take pleasure in wine and women and places for gross sense pleasure. The swans do not take pleasure in the places where crows are assembled for conferences and meetings. They are instead seen in the atmosphere of natural scenic beauty, where there are transparent reservoirs of water, nicely decorated with stems of lotus flowers, in variegated colors of natural beauty. That is the difference between the two classes of birds. Nature has influenced different species of life with different mentalities, and it is not possible to bring them up into the same rank and file. Similarly, there are different kinds of literature for different types of men of different mentality. Mostly the market literatures, which attract men of the crows categories, are literatures containing refused remnants of sensuous topics. They are generally known as mundane talks in relation with the gross body and subtle mind. They are full of subject matter described in decorative language, full of mundane similes and metaphorical arrangements. Yet, with all that, they do not glorify the Lord. Such poetry and prose on any subject matter is considered decoration of a dead body. Spiritually advanced men who are compared to the swans do not take pleasure in such dead literatures, which are sources of pleasure for men who are spiritually dead. These literatures in the modes of passion and ignorance are distributed under different labels, but they can hardly help the spiritual urge of the human being, and thus the swan-like spiritually advanced men have nothing to do with them. Such spiritually advanced men are called also manasa, because they always keep up the standard of transcendental voluntary service to the Lord on the spiritual plane. This completely forbids fruitive activities for gross bodily sense satisfaction or subtle speculation of the material egotistic mind. Social literary men, scientists, mundane poets, theoretical philosophers, and politicians who are completely absorbed in the material advancement of sense pleasure are all dolls of the material energy. They take pleasure in a place where rejected subject matters are thrown. According to Swami Sridhara, this is the pleasure of the prostitute hunters. But literatures which describe the glories of the Lord are enjoyed by Paramahansas who have grasped the essence of human activities. Wow, Prabhupada is really waxing eloquent, as they say in good English. Right? So, now, we're going to finally find that verse. I think I know where it is. 411. So, 454. Well, yeah, the Rajavidya verse. And 455. God, realization. 837. It's Brahma Bhuta. That's that verse. Yeah, keep coming back to that. One who is thus transcendently situated at once realizes Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He's equally disposed toward every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. So that's the verse. There's no doubt about it. And in the purport, okay, it says, in the material concept of life, when one works for sense gratification, there is misery. But in the absolute world, when one is engaged in pure devotional service, there is no misery. The devotee in Krishna consciousness is nothing for which to lament or desire. Since God is full, a living entity who is engaged in God's service in Krishna consciousness becomes also full in himself. He is just like a river cleansed of all dirty water. Because a pure devotee has no thought other than Krishna, he is naturally always joyful. He does not lament for any material loss or aspire for gain, because he is full in the service of the Lord. He has no desire for material enjoyment, because he knows that every living entity is a fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and therefore eternally a servant. He does not see in the material world someone as higher and someone as lower. Higher and lower positions are ephemeral or temporary, and a devotee has nothing to do with ephemeral or temporary appearances or disappearances. For him, stone and gold are of equal value. This is the Brahma Bhuta stage, and this stage is attained very easily by a pure devotee. In that stage of existence, the idea of becoming one with the Supreme Brahman and annihilating one's individuality becomes hellish. The idea of attaining the heavenly kingdom becomes phantasmagoria, meaning like a dream. And the senses are like serpents' teeth that are broken. As there is no fear of a serpent with broken teeth, there is no fear from the senses when they are automatically controlled. The world is miserable for the materially infected person, but for a devotee, the entire world is as good as Vaikuntha, or the spiritual sky. The highest personality in this material universe is no more significant than an ant for a devotee. Such a stage can be achieved by the mercy of the Lord, Lord Chaitanya, who preached pure devotional service in this age. So that's the verse. And that answers the question. And the question was that no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in the devotional service of the Lord, In the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is clearly mentioned. Okay. All right, so now this text 10 is full of a lot of, let's say Prabhupada has made it full of a lot of insults to the materialists, right? And
maybe this 2.66.
what's it say?
2.66.
I know, what's it say? What?
Nasti buddhi
Ayudhyasya nachayuktasya bhavana nachabhavyatakse santasya kutasukam. Nasti buddhi ayuktasya. Without intelligence connected to Krishna, one does not have a steady mind or clear consciousness, right? Is that it?
can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind,
Yeah.
without which there is no possibility of peace. And how
Without which there's no happiness.
happiness without peace.
Yeah. That comes close.
So maybe the word please.
But there's no, it doesn't mention devotional service, though.
So Maharaj, based on this search engine in the database, it is showing the nearest match is 5.6 and 6.4.
We read 5.6.
Yeah, and the 6.4. So all
Yeah.
I put the sentence, the whole sentence in the search engine,
Yeah.
pulling those ones.
But in the purport or in the verse
Not
itself?
in the verse.
Uh-huh.
So in the 5.6 is coming in the translation. In 6.4 it is coming in the purport.
Okay.
In the purport,
Yeah, we went to 5.6.
yeah.
We went to 5.6.
And the 6.4 Prabhupada mentioned later in the paragraph, specifically about people who are after this four Purusharthas, material like dharma, the kama, motion, they will not derive the pleasure,
Hmm.
just they take to the devotional service. And he gives a creeper, which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives the example. And this fact is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam. He puts the reference to Srimad Bhagavatam.
Okay, good.
6.4.
6.4. Okay, write it out. Write it out. Yeah, without Krishna consciousness, one must be always seeking self-centered or extended selfish activities. But a Krishna conscious person can do everything for the satisfaction of Krishna and thereby be perfectly detached from sense gratification.
Maybe one verse, not separate.
6.4 last paragraph.
Last paragraph?
Yeah, 6.4 last paragraph.
There's only one paragraph.
No, it's in the purport. 6.4.
Yeah.
What I wanted to know.
5.6 comes close. So 5.6 is the negative way of saying it. It says, merely renouncing activities, yet not engaging in the devotional service of the Lord cannot make one happy. But a thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the supreme without delay. Yeah, that's very close. Very, very close. Yeah, because when I looked at Brahmabhuta verse, I had 5.6 as a cross reference. That's why we went to it previously. Okay, good. So we did our homework. Good. Okay, so now did we have a homework for today? From last week?
Last week, I don't know, I wasn't there last week.
No. Okay, so the homework for next week is Yeah, homework is explain specifically what is the root cause of despondency of Vyasadeva. And explain if this is and explain if this can be pertinent to our lives. Explain if this can be pertinent to our lives. If this is, let's say, also relevant to our lives. So basically, if you read carefully text 9 in chapter 5 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, you'll see it says, and still, instead of giving more importance to the better type of engagement, namely devotional service to the Lord, he had more or less improperly used his valuable time, and thus he was despondent. From this, it is clearly indicated that no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in a devotional service to the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is clearly mentioned. So, the homework is to explain precisely what is causing the despondency of Vyasadeva, and does this have any relevance to our life? So that way you'll incorporate the research we did today. Okay? Haribo.
Sorry, I was quoting different one. I'm referring to this one.
Which one?
10.9, Machitta Malkita Prana.
Yeah.
That's what directly says with the direction with
Great satisfaction and bliss.
satisfaction. And the purport again quotes Srimad Bhagavatam, third paragraph.
Which Srimad Bhagavatam?
Is the 10.9?
Yeah, 10.9.